The scorching summer sun of 1858 beat down mercilessly as Rosalie Davenport clutched her younger brother's hand, watching flames lick the horizon behind their wagon train. What had begun as a hopeful journey toward California's promise had transformed into a nightmare of fire and smoke on the unforgiving Nebraska Territory plains. "Everyone stay calm," shouted Mr. Whitman, their wagon master, though the panic in his voice betrayed his own fear. "The wind's pushing the fire straight toward us. Gather what you can carry and prepare to abandon the wagons." Rosalie's heart pounded against her ribs as she scanned the chaotic scene. 20 wagons had set out from Independence, Missouri, nearly 2 months ago. Now, those same wagons carrying the dreams and possessions of families seeking a new life might become their funeral pyres. "Rose, I'm scared," 8-year-old Thomas whispered, his small fingers digging into her palm. "I know, Tommy." "But we'll be all right," she assured him, though she wasn't certain at all. At 22, Rosalie had become the boys' guardian after their parents succumbed to cholera just outside St. Louis. She'd insisted on continuing west rather than returning to their empty home in Pennsylvania. Now, she wondered if that decision would cost them their lives. The crackling of the approaching fire grew louder, drowning out the cries of terrified children and the panicked lowing of oxen. Smoke thickened the air, making it difficult to breathe. Rosalie pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, dampened it with precious water from her canteen, and tied it around Tommy's face. "We need to move north," Whitman bellowed, pointing to a slight depression in the land. "The grass isn't as tall there, maybe we can outrun it," but Rosalie knew better. The fire was moving too fast, driven by winds that had picked up throughout the afternoon. Their oxen were tired from the day's journey, and many of the children and elderly wouldn't be able to run fast enough. That's when she heard the thundering of hooves cutting through the roar of the flames. From the west came a lone rider, pushing his horse harder than seemed possible. As he drew closer, Rosalie could see he was standing in his stirrups, scanning the landscape with the practiced eye of someone who knew this land intimately. The stranger pulled his mount to a sliding stop before their wagon train. He was tall and lean, his face bronzed by the sun and partially hidden beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Dust and sweat had carved trails down his cheeks, but his eyes, sharp and alert, took in the situation instantly. "You folks are in trouble," he called out, his voice carrying despite the chaos around them. "That fire's moving too fast to outrun, and it'll reach you in less than 15 minutes. Mr. Whitman stumbled forward. "We know that, mister. If you've got nothing helpful to say, then move on." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion. "Name's Xavier O'Malley. I've been tracking this fire since yesterday. There's a way through, but you'll need to work fast and do exactly as I say." Rosalie stepped forward, drawn to the calm certainty in his voice. "How can we possibly get through a wall of flame?" Xavier's gaze met hers, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "The fire's not uniform, madam. There's a low spot about half a mile west where a creek's dried up. The ground's damper there and the grass is sparser. If we wet down the wagons and move fast, we can break through where the flames are weakest." "And if you're wrong?" Whitman challenged. Xavier's expression hardened. "Then we die trying instead of standing here waiting for the fire to claim us." "Your choice." In the tense silence that followed, Rosalie found her voice. "I trust him," she said, surprising even herself. "We need to try." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes, gratitude, perhaps, before he turned back to Whitman. "We need to soak the canvas covers. Every water barrel you've got, start pouring it over the wagons. Then we'll form a tight line and move together." The next 10 minutes passed in a blur of frantic activity. Rosalie worked alongside the other women, drenching the canvas covers of their wagons while men unhitched unnecessary items to lighten the load. Xavier moved among them, calm but insistent, helping where needed and providing clear directions. As they worked, he appeared at Rosalie's side. "You and your boy should ride in the middle of the train," he said, nodding toward Tommy. It'll be the safest spot. He's my brother, she corrected, wringing water from her skirt. Our parents died on the trail, it's just us now. Xavier nodded, his expression softening slightly. I'm sorry for your loss. You're brave to continue on, or foolish, she replied. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Sometimes there's not much difference between the two. He glanced at the approaching fire. Time to move. Stay close to your wagon and keep your brother inside with wet blankets over him. As Xavier turned to leave, Rosalie caught his arm. Thank you for stopping to help us. Don't thank me yet, Miss Davenport, Rosalie Davenport. Don't thank me yet, Miss Davenport. We still need to make it through. The wagon train formed a tight line as Xavier had instructed. He rode ahead on his horse, leading them toward the point where he believed they could break through the fire. Rosalie sat at the reins of their wagon, Tommy secured inside beneath damp blankets. The heat was becoming unbearable, and breathing grew more difficult with each passing moment. As they approached the wall of flames, Rosalie's courage nearly failed her. The fire stretched across the horizon like the gates of hell thrown open. Smoke billowed upward in great, choking clouds, and the roar was deafening. How could anyone survive passing through that inferno? Xavier rode back along the line, shouting final instructions. Keep the wagons tight, don't stop for anything. If a wagon falls behind, its occupants need to jump into another. We go through together or not at all. When he reached Rosalie's wagon, he paused. Are you ready? She wanted to say no, to tell him this was madness. Instead, she nodded, tightening her grip on the reins. Stay directly behind the wagon in front of you, he said. I'll clear a path. Once we start, don't stop until we're well beyond the fire line. With that, Xavier spurred his horse forward, unwinding a length of rope as he went. At the end was a heavy metal hook, which he began to swing in wide circles. As they approached the fire, he charged ahead and used the hook to drag burning brush away from their path, creating a narrow corridor. Rosalie watched in awe as he worked, moving with the precision of a man who understood fire's behavior. When he'd created an opening, he waved the wagons forward. Now, Whitman bellowed from the lead wagon. Everyone move now. Rosalie snapped the reins and their oxen lurched forward. The heat intensified as they approached the flames, becoming so fierce it felt as though her skin might blister. The oxen balked, but she urged them on, knowing hesitation meant death. And then they were in it, surrounded by fire on all sides. Smoke choked the air and embers rained down upon them. Rosalie could barely see the wagon ahead through the thick haze. She pulled her damp handkerchief over her mouth and kept pushing forward, trusting Xavier's judgment. Through watering eyes, she caught glimpses of him riding alongside the train, using his rope and hook to clear fresh obstacles, dragging burning debris away from their path. Twice he disappeared into smoke so thick she feared he'd been consumed by the flames, only to emerge moments later, his clothing singed but his determination unbroken. The journey through the fire seemed to last an eternity, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. Wagon wheels rolled over hot coals, canvas smoldered despite being soaked, and several times sparks caught in the hay loaded on various wagons, requiring quick action to extinguish them. When they finally broke through to the other side, Rosalie could scarcely believe they'd made it. The air, while still smoky, was breathable and the immediate danger had passed. The wagons pulled to a stop in a relatively clear area, and people stumbled out, coughing and checking for injuries. Xavier rode through the group, counting wagons. 19, he announced, his voice hoarse from smoke. We're missing one. Whitman did his own count, face paling. The Millers, they were at the back. Without hesitation, Xavier wheeled his horse around, preparing to return to the inferno. You can't go back in there, Rosalie called out, jumping down from her wagon. Xavier met her gaze. I won't leave them behind. Before she could say anything else, he was gone, riding back into the wall of flame and smoke. The minutes that followed were the longest of Rosalie's life. She held Tommy close, the boy trembling against her side as they stared at the fire line. When Xavier finally emerged, his horse was pulling the Miller wagon, its canvas cover completely burned away. Inside, Mrs. Miller clutched her infant daughter while Mr. Miller lay unconscious, overcome by smoke. Xavier's shirt was burned in several places, and angry red marks showed on his exposed skin, but he'd saved them all. As night fell, the wagon train made camp a safe distance from the still burning prairie. The fire continued its relentless march eastward, but they were now out of immediate danger. Rosalie tended to Xavier's burns with salve she'd brought from Pennsylvania, her touch gentle as she applied the medicine to his reddened skin. "You could have died going back for them," she said softly as they sat by a small cook fire. Tommy had fallen asleep in their wagon, exhausted by the day's terror. Xavier winced slightly as she touched a particularly bad burn on his forearm. "Couldn't leave them to die. Why did you help us at all? You could have ridden past, saved yourself the trouble." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames of their small fire. 3 years ago, I was traveling with my brother's family to California. Similar situation, prairie fire caught us by surprise. A Pawnee scout showed us a way through, but his voice faltered. "My brother's wagon didn't make it. I swore I'd never stand by and watch another family face that fate if I could help it." Rosalie's hands stilled on his arm. "I'm so sorry." "Life out here is hard," he said simply, "but it doesn't mean we stop trying to make it better for each other." Their eyes met across the small fire, and Rosalie felt something shift inside her, a recognition that this man was different from others she'd known. There was a depth to him, a quiet strength that called to her own resilience. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "California, eventually." "I've been scouting for the Army, mapping the territories. My contract ends this fall." "Then what?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Find some land, build something that lasts." As the days passed and the wagon train continued westward, Xavier remained with them. He'd intended to ride ahead after ensuring they were safely away from the fire, but Whitman had convinced him to stay on as a scout. His knowledge of the territory was invaluable, and his presence brought comfort to families still shaken by their brush with death. For Rosalie, his continued presence brought something else entirely, a growing awareness of him as more than just their rescuer. She found herself watching him as he worked with the men, taught the children how to identify edible plants, or sat quietly by the fire at night, whittling small animals from wood for the younger children. 2 weeks after the fire, as they made camp near the fork of the North Platte River, Rosalie found Xavier standing at the water's edge, skipping stones across the slow-moving current. "Tommy's been looking for you," she said, approaching. "He wants to show you the rabbit snare he made based on your instructions." Xavier smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "That boy's a quick learner. He'll do well out west. Thanks to you, he's needed someone to look up to since our father died." Xavier skipped another stone, watching it bounce 5 times before sinking. "He's lucky to have you. Not many sisters would take on such responsibility." "I couldn't bear to lose him too," she said simply. Then, changing the subject, "the Millers named their baby Rose, after me." "Fitting," Xavier said, turning to face her fully. "You gave them hope when they needed it most, convinced everyone to trust a stranger with a wild plan. A stranger who saved all our lives." The silence between them hummed with unspoken words. Xavier took a step closer, close enough that Rosalie could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, "about changing my plans." "Oh," her heart quickened. "This wagon train is headed to the Sacramento Valley. I know good land there, fertile soil for farming, but there's also unclaimed territory further north, less settled, more challenging but beautiful beyond words." Rosalie waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "I thought I might stake a claim there." "Build that something lasting I mentioned." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I find myself wondering if you and Tommy might consider, that is, if you haven't made firm plans in California already. Are you asking if we join you?" Rosalie whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Xavier met her gaze steadily. I'm asking if you'd consider building something together, with me. I know it's sudden and you hardly know me, but I know enough, she interrupted. I've seen your character, Xavier. The way you risk yourself for others, how you teach Tommy with patience, how you respect everyone in this train from Mr. Whitman down to the youngest child. Hope flickered across his face. And is that enough to consider a future together? Rosalie took a deep breath. It's a start. A good one. Before he could respond, Tommy's voice called out from behind them. Rose, Xavier, look what I caught. They turned to see the boy running toward them, proudly holding a small rabbit. My snare worked, just like you showed me, Xavier grinned, ruffling the boy's hair as he approached. Well done. That'll make a fine addition to tonight's stew. As Tommy chattered excitedly about his trap, Rosalie watched the interaction, seeing the natural ease between them. Perhaps Xavier was right, perhaps they'd seen enough of each other's character to know this could be the beginning of something meaningful. That night, as the wagon train gathered for their evening meal, Mr. Whitman stood and raised his cup. To our guardian angel, Xavier O'Malley. Without him, we'd all be ashes on the prairie by now. Cheers went up around the circle, but Xavier looked uncomfortable with the attention. I just did what anyone would do, he mumbled. That's not true, Mrs. Miller said, cradling baby Rose in her arms. Not everyone would ride into fire for strangers. After the meal, as families retired to their wagons, Xavier walked Rosalie and Tommy back to theirs. Tommy clambered inside, exhausted from his day of hunting and playing, but Rosalie lingered. I've been thinking about what you said, she told Xavier quietly, about the land up north. His expression grew attentive. And I'd need to know more about the land, about your plans, about, she hesitated, about us, what you envision. Xavier nodded slowly. Fair enough. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, Rosalie, just asking you to consider it. I am, she assured him, considering it very seriously. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Riders from a wagon train ahead had brought warnings of hostile activity along their planned route. A band of raiders, neither Native American nor white settlers, but a mixed group of desperate men had been attacking small parties and isolated wagons. We need to change course, Whitman announced. Head northwest for a spell before turning back toward California. The detour would take them near the territory Xavier had mentioned the previous day. As the train prepared to move out, he approached Rosalie as she hitched her oxen. This route will take us close to the land I told you about, he said. Perhaps you could see it for yourself before deciding. The idea sent a thrill through her. I'd like that. Over the next week, as they traveled the new route, Xavier spent more time with Rosalie and Tommy. He taught them about the land, pointing out signs of water, good soil, and natural protection from winter winds. In the evenings, he shared stories of his travels, painting pictures of mountains and valleys that made Rosalie long to see them for herself. Tommy flourished under Xavier's guidance, soaking up wilderness knowledge like a sponge. He began referring to Xavier as Sir without prompting, and Rosalie noticed how her brother watched for the man's approval whenever he mastered a new skill. 12 days after changing their route, the wagon train crested a ridge, and Xavier rode up beside Rosalie's wagon. There, he said, pointing to a valley below them. That's the place I've been telling you about. Rosalie's breath caught in her throat. The valley stretched before them, a patchwork of meadows and trees with a clear stream running through its center. In the distance, snow-capped mountains provided a majestic backdrop. It was more beautiful than she'd imagined. Can we go down and see it? She asked. Xavier glanced at Whitman, who was consulting with another scout. We're making camp early today to rest the oxen. I could take you down if Whitman approves. An hour later, Rosalie and Xavier rode double on his horse down into the valley, leaving Tommy reluctantly behind with the Millers. As they descended, Xavier pointed out features of the land, the southern exposure that would extend the growing season, the natural spring that would provide water year-round, the stands of timber for building. They dismounted near the stream, and Rosalie knelt to touch the clear water. "It's perfect," she murmured. Xavier watched her, his expression intense. "I've traveled most of the Western Territories, Rosalie, seen places that would take your breath away. But when I found this valley last spring, something told me this was it. This was where I belonged." She stood, meeting his gaze. "And now you want to share it, only with the right people." He took a step closer. "I know this is fast. We've known each other barely a month, but out here life doesn't always give us the luxury of time." "No," she agreed softly. "It doesn't." Xavier took her hands in his. "I'm not a man of many words, Rosalie, but I know what I feel. When I saw you at that wagon train, standing tall despite your fear, caring for your brother when most would have crumbled, something changed for me. I'd been wandering so long I'd forgotten what it meant to have a home, but home isn't just a place, it's the people you share it with." Tears stung Rosalie's eyes. "I feel it too, this connection between us. It terrifies me how quickly it's happened, but I can't deny it exists." "Then don't deny it," he said simply. "Stay, build this place with me. Let Tommy grow up with space to run and a stream to fish in. Let us see what we could become together." Rosalie looked around the valley, imagining a cabin nestled among the trees, fields of wheat and corn, perhaps cattle grazing on the hillsides. She could see Tommy growing tall and strong in this place, and Xavier by her side as the seasons turned. "Yes," she whispered, turning back to him. "Yes, I'll stay." The joy that spread across Xavier's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held promise and passion in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I need to tell Tommy," she said, her hands still resting against Xavier's chest. "We'll tell him together," Xavier replied. "And then we'll need to speak with Whitman. The train will continue on in a few days, but we'll need supplies if we're to start building before winter." As they rode back to the camp, plans forming between them, Rosalie felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. The path ahead would not be easy. Building a life from nothing in this wilderness would test them daily, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the challenges. That evening, they told Tommy, who responded with unbridled enthusiasm. "Our own land. We're really staying here, with Xavier." "If that's what you want to," Rosalie said carefully. Tommy launched himself at Xavier, nearly knocking the man over. "Yes, will you teach me to build a cabin and hunt deer and ride like you do?" Xavier laughed, steadying the boy. "All of that and more, but it'll be hard work, Tommy." "Harder than anything you've done before." "I don't care," the boy declared. "I want to stay." The next day, Whitman called a meeting of the wagon train. Though clearly disappointed to lose their scout, he understood Xavier's decision. "A man finds his place in this world. He'd be a fool not to claim it," the wagon master said. Several families offered supplies, tools, seeds, extra food to help the new settlers establish themselves. The Miller family, in particular, insisted on leaving them one of their milk cows. "A gift for our daughter's namesake," Mr. Miller said, his arm around his wife and baby. On their final night with the wagon train, a celebration was held. Someone produced a fiddle, and impromptu dancing broke out around the campfire. Xavier, usually reserved, pulled Rosalie into the circle, his hand warm at her waist as they spun under the stars. "Are you certain?" he asked as they moved to the music. "There's still time to continue to California if you have doubts." Rosalie shook her head. "No doubts, not anymore." Later, as the celebration wound down, Whitman approached them with a Bible in hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "I'm authorized to perform marriages on this journey. Seems to me you two might want to begin your new life properly bound together." Xavier looked at Rosalie, the question clear in his eyes. They'd discussed marriage but had planned to wait until they'd built their cabin and established themselves. Rosalie smiled, taking Xavier's hand. "I can't think of anything more proper," she said. And so, beneath the vast canopy of stars, with the wagon train gathered in a circle around them, Rosalie Davenport and Xavier O'Malley exchanged vows. Tommy stood proudly beside them, beaming as Whitman pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," Whitman said, closing his Bible. As Xavier's lips met hers, sealing their promise to each other, Rosalie thought of the fire that had brought them together. How something so destructive had led to this moment of perfect joy. Life's paths were strange indeed. The next morning, the wagon train departed, continuing its journey west. Rosalie, Xavier, and Tommy stood watching until the last wagon disappeared over the horizon. They were alone now, the first settlers in their valley. "Well," Xavier said, taking Rosalie's hand, "shall we begin?" Together, they walked down into the valley that would become their home. By mid-afternoon, they had marked the spot where their cabin would stand. Xavier began felling trees while Rosalie and Tommy cleared the ground of stones and undergrowth. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, they built a small fire and sat together, planning the days ahead. "Tomorrow we'll start on a temporary shelter," Xavier said. "It won't be much, but it'll keep us dry until the cabin is built." Rosalie leaned against his shoulder, watching Tommy chase fireflies at the edge of their camp. "It will be perfect," she said. That night, as they lay beneath the stars, Xavier's arm around her and Tommy sleeping peacefully nearby, Rosalie thought of how quickly life could change. 2 months ago, she'd been guiding her brother westward, uncertain of their future and carrying the weight of grief. Now she was building a new life with a man who'd ridden through fire to save her. "What are you thinking?" Xavier whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "That sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the most frightening moments," she replied. "If not for that fire, we might never have met," he pulled her closer. "I'd have found you somehow. Some things are meant to be." 5 years later, Rosalie stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching Xavier teach their 3-year-old daughter, Clara, to ride her first pony. Tommy, now 13 and nearly as tall as Xavier, supervised carefully, ready to catch his niece if she slipped. The valley had flourished under their care. Fields of wheat and corn stretched where once there had been only wild grass. A small orchard of apple trees was beginning to bear fruit. 3 more families had joined them over the years, building their own homesteads within the valley, creating a small but thriving community. As Clara's delighted laughter rang out across the yard, Rosalie placed a hand over her belly, where their second child was growing. Life hadn't been easy. There had been harsh winters, failed crops, and moments of doubt, but they had faced each challenge together. Xavier looked up, catching her eye across the yard. The love in his gaze was as strong as it had been that first day in the valley. He said something to Tommy, then crossed to where she stood. "How are my girls today?" he asked, placing his hand over hers on her stomach. "We're perfect," Rosalie replied, leaning into his embrace. "Just perfect." As they stood together watching Tommy and Clara, Rosalie thought about the fire that had once threatened everything, how terrifying it had been to see those flames surrounding their wagon train. Yet from those flames, a love had been kindled that burned stronger with each passing year. Sometimes, she reflected, you had to pass through fire to find your way home.